Hello and welcome back to KSP POV, where we play Kerbal Space Program in first person. And despite what the past few episodes would lead you to believe, this actually is a space program. And today we're going to kind of refocus on that, and we're going to get a satellite up into space and into orbit. I've been having a lot of fun with the planes, and we are going to do a little bit more of that later. But now it's time to turn our eyes back to space, and we need to start making a lot more science, and more science than we can gather just doing airplane contracts. So that's why we're going to build ourselves a little satellite. The mod ScanSat allows you to map the celestial bodies, and so we're going to make one of those. It's a beautiful morning at the KSC. The sunrise casting a nice orange glow. The cloud and weather effects are from BlackRock's volumetric clouds. So here we are. We have a contract to place a satellite in a relay satellite around Kerbal. So let's go ahead and design that. But we also have the contract to get a probe into orbit and to return it back home. So that's what this little first part is the capsule that we're going to bring back home. So here you can see me rating my parachutes fairly low. I hadn't tested that height for deployment, and so we'll see how it goes. So we're going to come back into the research and development place because we have quite a bit of science to spend. So we're going to unlock this advanced rocketry, and that gives us the Terrier, but I'm not really interested in that. We already have a Beagle, and that's a little bit better. But it's this propulsion systems that I'm looking for, and this is propulsion systems for tiny probes. Heavy rocketry is great, and we're going to need that soon, but we're launching small scale things, so we don't need heavy boosters and heavy lifters for that. So we're going to go ahead and get this propulsion system. And then we're going to come down here and look at a few other things. We're getting flight control, but only that's because that leads into other things like this advanced flight control. But we're not going to be really using the flight control node on this mission. Alright, so here we are. We need a relay satellite. We need to establish orbit. So there's not really much I need for the established orbit. Basically just a probe core. This will be the control point of the rocket, so it will be considered the main part. Therefore, it should satisfy the mission. So we're going to throw on some of these little tiny thrusters, little chickadee thrusters, and they feed monopropellant. So we're going to get a couple monopropellant canisters on there. And we're just going to clip it in because it doesn't really matter all that much. It's not going to threaten it. And now we're going to build the actual satellite. This is going to be the ScanSat that is going to be multi-purpose. It's not only going to scan our surface, but it's going to run a few experiments that we haven't yet run. And it's going to have some communication dishes on it, so it will function as a relay satellite as well. And since it's going to be in a polar orbit, and it needs to be in a polar orbit for the ScanSat to fully work, but since it's going to be in a polar orbit, it's going to be a huge benefit for when we start putting up our communications network equatorially. Alright, so we got the GoreSat and this, I forget the name of it, but this other experiment that we put on there is from D-Magic's Orbital Science. And so we have yet to run that in the upper space and lower space. I believe one of them can only work in upper space. So we're going to put on some communications. There's a couple communitrons to help, even though they have relay dishes. Since we're going to be sending information back to Kerbal, we want to have something that we know can transmit. Alright, looking over it, it's pretty good. Don't know what else it's going to need. Not entirely sure why I have so many Communitrons on there. I'm glad I didn't put that third one on there, but I only needed the one, so. But, you know, it doesn't hurt. We're playing career mode after all, but this is a relatively cheap satellite, and we have quite a bit of funds. I'm telling you, starting off with all of those test this experiment at this part of the KSC that we did back in episode 3 really gave us a leg up on our start. So as I mentioned before, we don't have heavy lifting rockets, and so this lower stage is going to be a little funky. Definitely not realistic. It's following a very Kerbal type of idea. But since we don't have the type of decouplers that extend out, we're going to just make them ourselves using some girders. And that way it'll extend past the wide engine that we have down there at the bottom. I really like how the design of this one came out. I really enjoyed how the side boosters looked with this little stripy pattern here, and how the center booster looked with that little dark bit. Alright, so now I have side boosters with a fuel duct and some struts to keep them stabilized. We're going to throw some parachutes on it to hopefully recover the stage, and we're going to throw some explosives on the center stage so that way we don't leave it out in orbit. Going to check my staging. Yes, it's very important to check your staging. Yep, looks good. And this is ready for a simulation. Just a few minor adjustments. Now we're ready. And now normally I don't share the simulation footage, I just kind of focus on the mission footage, but this is POV, so we're going to be in the control room this whole time, missing out on this beautiful sunset. So I just, I kind of wanted to share just how peaceful a sunset launch can be, rising through the clouds, and just gorgeous. I can't wait to play KSP 2 and see just how beautiful that game can be. I actually own it. I just don't have a machine that can run it, unfortunately. Look at that beautiful sunrise. Sunset. Just rising over the clouds, I guess. That's what I meant. Anyways, this was a successful simulation. So we're going to go ahead and bring this rocket back into the VAB, make our final little adjustments on it, and then we're going to get started with the mission. One of the things that is, I realize is very necessary is a reaction wheel, because this was hard to control once we got it up into space. I had to rely on using fuel to thrust myself to get a little bit of momentum, so reaction wheel will save us all that trouble. And this is why simulations are great, is because we could test the mission, figure that out, and then come back into the VAB. It does cost money though, so every time you see me simulate, I am paying for that, and that's why it's important in career mode to be very contract conscious. I also used the wrong probe core, so that was what this little switcheroo is all about. Is I did not have the SAS control that I thought I did. And we're just going to put it back together. The monopropellant was surprisingly efficient for this craft. The tiny little chickadee engines, and I mean it's powering just a tiny little probe, barely any mass to it. So it should be no surprise, but when you fire those thrusters and see just how much power you get out of it, it's pretty interesting. Just checking my action groups, making sure everything is set, making sure my cameras are in the right places. I don't have a camera on this upper probe, and I didn't like that when in my test flight, so I'm going to put one on the outside of it to look downwards, and that will allow us to keep an eye on our descent in the final stage of this mission. There we go, looking good. Let's put this back into the fairing. We're going to take off the explosive device because in our test the lifter stage didn't even make it into orbit, so it's going to come back through the atmosphere. We don't need to destroy it. It's not in danger of becoming space trash. So we're going to throw some parachutes on it because we have the stage recovery mod. And as you can see, that it's all in green. All of the lifting part of the vehicle theoretically should be able to be recovered. There we go. Our staging is correct. Mostly correct. It's always important to check your staging in the VAB because it's a lot harder to... I mean, you can make changes out in the actual flight itself, but if you have to revert or you have to reload a save, much harder. Alright, let's get this thing out on the launch pad. So, we are launching at that time, that beautiful sunset that we got to see earlier, but of course we are going to be in the confines of the probe control room because that is the confines of this series. We are a POV series. And so, we're going to miss out on that. Our cameras are nice, but not nice enough to capture the true beauty of this game. Anyways, let's get to work. So here we are, in the body of Gene Kerman, the flight director of the Kerbal Space Program, launching the SpySat-1. We're going to get our screens up the way that we want them. And this mission I'm going to show, for the most part, uncut. There's going to be some edits in here. There's going to be some... basically, when I'm waiting for a maneuver, I'm going to kind of do a little fade in between just to speed things up a little bit for you. But I'm going to go through the entirety of this mission in a little bit. Once we start making... this routine, we're going to kind of focus more on the later parts of the mission as opposed to the launch sequence and this initiation part where I'm getting all my screens together and getting ready for the launch. I find it very enjoyable. I like the pre-setup, the pre-flight checklist and all that stuff, but as we get along in the series, it may become tedious, so we'll skip that. But for now, as we launch our very first satellite, after spending so much time on Kerbin's planet surface, we're getting back and getting ready to do some science. And throttle up. Engines ignite. we have liftoff. So once again, this is going to be a polar orbit satellite, so we are going to be launching south instead of east. And that's why I have the boosters on the opposite side that I normally have them on, is because this way they can still launch horizontally with the rocket. And we're pitching down slightly. We're gonna fast forward a little bit. It's a long and slow journey. As we start getting higher into the atmosphere, we throttle down as to not fight the drag of the atmosphere and lose efficiency. And we're just going to lock prograde, and that will just keep us focused in the right direction. These early rockets can still be a little precarious, and if I try to gravity turn too aggressively, it will flip over. So now here we are getting ready to decouple the side boosters. Fast forwarded some time there, and we are now above the clouds. And with its remaining delta V dissipated, we're going to go ahead and flip that switch. As it comes down, it collides with the other side booster, and one of them loses its parachute, so we're only going to be able to recover one of those, but the funds that we do recover from it are nice, and so it's good. It's nice to be conscious about the cost of each rocket and what you can possibly squeeze out of funds. So we're going to skip forward a little bit until our apoapsis hits the 200 mark, and that's where we're going to try to aim for. We're about 37 kilometers above the surface, so we have some heating effect going on, as you can see in the TV screen, but we're going to be out of that pretty soon. And we have officially hit space. We can start plotting our maneuver. I like to wait until I actually hit the line of space to plot the maneuver, so the computer doesn't think you're in the atmosphere while it's calculating the delta V necessary. Just give it every possible opportunity. So I go ahead and deploy the solar panels and communication dishes, and as we saw in our camera, we were already lined up with the sun, so we're at an optimal position. And now what we're going to do is we're going to try to turn this little boat over to the maneuver node. However, it is slow going. I have some time, so I decide to kick on the thrust a little bit, just a little bit, just to get myself moving, completely forgetting that I could physics warp and just speed up the time, because we don't need to rush ourselves into this maneuver node. We don't have to force ourselves to get there right now, because we're going to miss our maneuver if we don't. We have plenty of time, so when you have time to spare, rather than using your thrust to act as your control, use time warp. But I spent all that time lining myself up only to hit the SAS prograde button, so no need. But the SAS prograde isn't quite on par with the maneuver node direction, so honestly I can't tell you why I chose that over what I already had. So we're thrusting very hard because that lower stage had quite a large thrust to weight ratio to begin with, but out here in the vacuum. So that's what that alarm was, but thankfully the craft ran out of, or the stage ran out of fuel, and that killed that. And our our Beagle engine has a higher than 1 thrust to weight ratio, so it can handle the rest of the burn no problem without going into high G's. So now I'm just gonna, I killed my burn so I could come up to a little bit higher of an altitude and burn the rest of the way. We need the satellite below 250 kilometers for it to be most effective. So we're gonna have to tune in our apoapsis and periapsis to fit the requirements. So this next little bit is we're just going to be positioning the satellite into place. So I don't think there's really much I need to explain here. You can watch this little screen and it'll tell you the times that it takes to get to each of the positions, and I'm just going to make the burns to get our orbit circularized. Both those numbers need to be below 250, but just ever so slightly below. Just there, we kicked off the probe. We're going to let that float for now, and we'll come back to it once this satellite is in position. And we kicked off the probe before we reached such a high altitude, so to give the probe the best chance of returning from orbit rather than being at such a high altitude. So our apoapsis and our periapsis is correct, so we went ahead and started the scan. However, I realized that we are at quite an angle. We're going to need to be as close to 90 degrees as possible for the scanner to have the best possible chance of scanning the entire planet. So now we are going to be working on the ascending nodes and the descending nodes, burning normal and anti-normal until we can get that number that says 6709. We need that to say 90. And to have a better efficiency on the burn, we're going to flip the opposite way and meet up on the opposite side and continue our maneuver. And there you have it. We're at 90. Excellent, but our apoapsis and our periapsis are now out of whack. So we're going to fix that once more. And we're not making maneuvers for this, we're just kind of eyeballing it. We have the ability of locking to each of the directions that we need to, so we don't necessarily need to plot maneuvers every single time. There we go, and now we're at the appropriate height, and all we need to do is leave this, and it will continue its scan as time goes on. We can focus on other ventures. Go ahead and we get its satellite pointed towards, or excuse me, the solar panels pointed towards the sun, and we use this persistent rotation window up there, but I'm not entirely sure how it works. I click it, but it doesn't rotate the craft in any way, so who knows. But this is just going to do its thing, and we'll come back to it later. So now it's time to bring this probe home to satisfy the orbit Kerbal contract. So since this is a new part to the craft, we're going to have to set up our screens and our chairs once again. But it doesn't take too long. We're getting used to the pre-flight checklist now. So here we are. The time to our apoapsis is appearing. We're going to burn retrograde at our apoapsis to bring our periapsis down enough that we can re-enter the atmosphere. And I'm very glad that I put that camera on this upper stage, because just the view coming back into Kerbal was worth it, worth the cost of the part. In POV, you end up spending money that you wouldn't have in other stock careers, because certain aspects to the missions are unavailable to you if you're not able to see them. Look at that. Look how quickly it took us into a downward trajectory. So I didn't want to go that steep of an angle, so I'm trying to flip my way back around and use all of my remaining monopropellant. Sadly, I was still not able to get as slight of an angle as I'd wanted to, but that's what we get for underestimating the power of those chickadees. So now we're over at the crash specialist desk. This is a part of the probe control room, which we haven't really used much this far, but now that we're on our way back down, that's what this desk is designed for. This is for returning back to Kerbal, descending through a planet's atmosphere, landing on a moon, all the good stuff. We've got our thermal gauges over there, and that'll tell us how hot everything is getting, and as you can see, it's already starting to rise as we descend through the atmosphere. I come back to the flight director's desk because I can get a little bit better of a view of everything, because there's nothing more that I can really do to control everything. It's just a matter of hoping that it works. I do put it into a spin to kind of dissipate some of the heat. I'm coming in much steeper than I had in my simulations. And then we eventually stop heating up and we come back down through the cloud layer. You remember when I set my parachutes to open up at 400 meters and to not actually fully deploy until 100 meters? Do you remember that? Gene was just told that that's what our parachutes were set to, and he's running over to Gus to scream at him, but he can't. It's too late. So we did not complete the contract to get into a stable orbit, so that's going to have to be a mission for another episode. But we did get our spy satellite up, so that'll serve a few contracts, as well as getting us a new map of our world. But anyways, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more KSP POV. If you did, please consider giving me a like, drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.